And welcome back to Late Night Gunpla with Tom Omega. Sorry, I forgot to actually check. Everything was pretty much right. I ran out of time as I was preparing, but welcome back to Late Night Gunpla. We are kind of on the finishing stretch, or the last stretch of the RX-78-2 Perfect Grade. I should be finishing up soon. So the idea today is starting on panel lining and decals, and actually I just thought that behind the curtain that's supposed to hide. Pay no attention to whatever goes on behind the curtain, but I had, wait, no, I do have a note. I should have a note. I thought I needed to grab my stickers, but actually no, I don't. I already do have them out. I just have them with the instruction manual. I need to grab that actually. While I'm at it, I did clean up a bit of the kind of table on the right side over here. So I kind of readjusted a bit, moved my kind of Stream Deck controller a little closer to the front here, but now I just need to make sure that it's kind of muscle memory. I also did a couple of changes on, there we go. Let's see, you guys should be hearing the music. You get to see down there in the corner. Yeah, down there. Yeah, over here. You know, kind of what song is playing. I hope the music is playing through. Actually, let me bring that down. Anyone who's kind of is watching, I hope they let me know if the music is still too loud for them, and if I need to bring up my mic. Okay. Yeah, let's see. Anyway, I don't know why I had my mic down, but yeah, so I've got that on there now. I also have a new game kind of audio mixer in. Started doing a couple of background kind of stuff on the stream. So like I said, hopefully I get music kind of coming through to you guys, but let me know if it's too loud and if I need to turn that down or not, my mic up or what have you. But yeah, I've kind of started doing that, trying it with what's this called, with Spotify right now. Yes, I finally got Spotify to see how that works. But yeah, it looks like the music is coming through. Anyway, so yes, we're finishing up with the panel lining. In addition, where'd that go? Oh, I forgot to turn that on. That would help. Again, running really late today. And are you back up? There we go. Yeah, so I took a little time today, or this week, yesterday, built the kind of Lego skull and altar, and I put it up in what we have as a little altar here in the house that my mom used to have set up. So that was done this week. I didn't do any more work on the master grade, but again, the idea today is starting on again, come back to the perfect grade and the panel lining and decals. So instruction manual is needed for that because for some reason they put it at the back of this one. So yeah, let's just open you up all the way. There you go. There it goes. So yeah, one whole sheet of stickers that will go on it. I think what I will do is start on the easy one, on the core fighter. So probably do need to leave this open. Actually, no. I'll have to see, because I don't think. So yeah, there are kind of little things. Extra. Probably need to. Where did my sheet go? I had a little microfiber towel. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. A little microfiber towel that I was using before, that I have used in the past to kind of do that. But we'll see, maybe just that. Alright, so as I was saying the last couple times, the outer frame of the Perfect Grade doesn't seem to have too much actual detail on it. So it looks like a lot of it is on the underframe. So a lot of the armor pieces don't really have parts that stick out, which on one hand could be good for people who like doing their customization, but I don't. You know, I don't trust myself yet to risk scribing beyond trying to rescribe, and I know I did the rescribing on the, there we go, yeah, it's a side view so you guys can see. I tried to do rescribing on the sheets, on the little bit right here under the, pretty much on the, I guess technically that would be the hip, allegedly. So yeah, I tried to do that part, and I know I went off a bit and gouged extra lines, so I'll have little panel lines extra there. But I want to try to do that. Definitely on the neck it has some, so that'll be done. I see little bits. So yeah, there's little bits here on the upper kind of shoulder pads, front and back, bit on the sides in here, but yeah, on the armor, well, this one seems to have that, but now I'm wondering if that's, I don't know if that's on purpose, but yeah, this one kind of does. And these internal parts do, and again on the inside they have little detail panel lines. So this one definitely has it on that little sheet, and these here on the inside of this, definitely there's a lot of panel lining to be done. Oh, yeah, you can kind of see it on the, yeah, there you go. So yeah, there is panel lining to do on that. Definitely on the beam sabers as well. Like not so much on the outside here. Oh yeah, there's some right there. Just kind of do it this way. Why don't you touching correctly? Alright, definitely on the back here there is more. I'll have to see how I want to do this part, because definitely might have to be like 2 runs, one here and then push this down, and then the top here in there as well, same. Now this one is going to be fun because on this side there's a piece of kind of glass that covers it, that hides it. On the outside, sure, I'll be able to do that, but then I'll have to deal with that. I don't know, the way this is kind of popped up, I wonder if I can kind of pop it out. So I want to try to pop it out, actually. Here's the question. Do it that way. This doesn't actually. You know what? I will use, where are you? There it goes. I have the Tamiya panel liner in gray. So I think what I will do with this one is, again, on the white parts, I will try to do it I don't think, again, on the inside here, there isn't. I don't think there is much pressure on any of these pieces, so. And as the kind of concern with this is, yeah, this one has it a bit, so I'll be using my usual Gundam marker for this, and like I said, I think I'll use this for at least most of this armor. Now, unfortunately, the way this piece goes in, I don't think there is, like, there's, the way it was put in, tried to pop it back out, but I don't want to risk breaking it. I don't think I can. Ugh. Right there, I broke it. Okay. Well, so, alright, now I can probably do all this. Right, so, yeah, let's get right to that. Actually, let's hydrate first. I'm a little thirsty. Yes, I have my water over here too. I'm used to having my water bottle down here on the floor. This is big enough where I can grab it. Alright, I don't need you here right now. I think I can put you up there. Yeah, I probably need to have a better way to hold these. I might put that over here now that I've got the space. I've got a little kind of holder, so I can probably put these in. Although brushes allegedly are better held kind of face down. They're supposed to be better for them. Kind of use gravity to kind of keep the brush kind of going. But yeah, I haven't been able to do that, and so I may have to just kind of stand them up on that. Of course I did that again. All of my it's a day. It's one of those days, huh? Cleaned up, but I didn't clean up the left side of my desk, so everything's kind of fun on that side right now. I tried to organize a bit, but just didn't quite do all that good a job. So now I'm just trying to clean up. Again, fell a little behind today, so I'm a little thrown off as well. Usually I have like an extra 10 minutes to prepare for the stream. Today, and we delayed a bit with the kids, and so now I'm a little behind here. Thing is, kind of do need these. Definitely need these. Got a whole pile of them, so it's not that big a deal. But then that requires me grabbing the pile. There's like a 6-pack of these packs that I bought. So it's kind of just going for it. So yeah, it's kind of a just pouch of these specialty, not exactly Q-tips because not the brand, but essentially because of these basic Q-tip things. Or different names for them. There it goes. All right. Goes. So yes, I won't need any more of any of that other stuff, but all right, let's go back to water again. I'm in no rush really right now to get any of this done yet. No rush yet, we'll say, because I know that I will have I put a little metal bearing that I have in there to kind of make sure it gets shaken up. Alright, start timer here, top down view. I'm also thinking of maybe altering this top camera a bit to maybe focus more on this part, because really this is the part I work on, or maybe just kind of do a bit of zoom in while I'm working, just because again I know most of the work I do is right here, so probably maybe just zoom in there from now on, because I know I have all the space, but generally my hands and only kind of really focus here. So I might do that. Yes. So let's start now. Start you. See how much this actually still has. Yeah, so see what I'm saying? I'm already doing that. Now, these are kind of some areas where probably could have done the kind of extra work on it with that's all that's done there. And then wait, what? Didn't say what goes on the, I'm sure there's some that should go on the shield, but there's no decal here. Sure there should be. Anyway, so yes, you are gonna be back here, you're gonna be there, so it's just Dudley gray is best for white, so let's go there. technique here. Well, not new. I mean, new for me to use it, but it is kind of an old kind of trick here. You know, Tamiya came out with this panel lining kind of paint that was meant for this. Okay, there's that one. Alright. Looks like there's another party. I think I saw them setting it up down the street a bit. So we still got kind of music on, well, sound and noise going on in the background. Doing a couple extra little bits here. Definitely goes. Alright. Next little fun bit here. I think I can just kind of cheat here like this. Just gonna run it all through it here. Okay. Alright. So now let's just kind of dip it into the corners. See how it kind of runs there. damn that alarm going off. Okay. So, break time. It's time for those stretches that my occupational therapist kind of encouraged me to engage in, because, you know, maybe that'll help a bit with that carpal tunnel that apparently I have. You know, explains the numbness in the fingers, or more so on the right thumb. And just kind of try and get that out the way. Well, I mean, they encouraged me to try to do this. I think she mentioned like every hour, but you know, who actually has time for that? So, the one she suggested to doing this time is kind of to the side, stretch the neck that way too. When I'm doing the hand stretch, try to get that in too. Now the other hand and the other side, kind of stretch the neck the other direction. Constance, thanks for the kind of, you know, watch. Thanks for kind of just having me in the background if that's what you're doing. Either way, appreciate it. These gray pieces. Now, I had done a bit of a gray wash, a metallic wash with the chrome, and I have one here. I mean, I've got extras, but I think I'd used it with, what did I use it for? What did I did it with? So yeah, did the chrome, and I used yeah, so there's part of it. Anyway, it did its job, got those parts in, but yeah, I might have to see how I want to do that, because really just this piece, and I mean, this part doesn't get seen, but I mean, kind of these little screw ports here, and that little bit here. I might want to see maybe this and here. Might be something I'll do. Yeah, I might do those as well. Right, so hydration, more water. There it goes. Okay. Alright, let's get back to it. Recording that again. Kind of works a little better is doing this every couple of little bits of space. Kind of make sure you fill in do it the way I had been doing it for some of these other pieces, where I was just kind of basically brushing it on along the whole edge. Or you can do what I've been doing here, just kind of touching it every couple of centimeters, I guess you can say. Especially at this point when it's really full. It's really meant to do those parts too, but here. A little bit of the shield here. A little bit. Alright, so I think for this, let me see if I can use regular Tamiya. I mean, it's Tamiya, so the X20 thinner should be able to work. Should being the keyword there. We'll have to see how that works. So definitely gonna try this on the pieces that should have dried by now. Why don't you? Should be the same thinner. It's not good. Interesting. Why is that not working? Okay, so not the X20 thinner. Interesting. We'll have to use something else. Alright. Make me have to break out the big guns. The Mr. Color Thinner. See how that one kind of works. It should work on that. Strong stuff. Right, that's definitely working on that part. Alright. There it goes. Okay, cool. Even getting it out of those extra recesses, so that's kind of cool. going off telling me it's time to pause here. So I will have to take it right now. But alright, come on. Yeah, alright, that's fun. So, alright, now good to know. I cannot use the regular X20 thinner for the pen line accent color stuff. Lesson learned, but good to know at least. But it's been kind of working pretty well, and kind of did work on this one. So I'll have to do it for at least some of the. Actually, I should probably start with some of that next time, or right now, at the next kind of start. And I'll do the white parts of it, pretty much just on the body of the core fighter. Have it use the gray. I'm hesitant to use that gray because again, on pressure fit parts it can lead to it cracking, which is a bit of why I tore apart the shield here in order to start doing that. So I am a little concerned about that being something that'll be part of the issue there, at least with the rest of the kit. But using the gray panel liner, I do have gray, kind of other kind of regular panel liner, kind of like, I don't have a gray power panel pore type one. I don't think I think I have a gray one. I know I have gray. I'm looking at it right now. Oh, okay. Well, it's a marker type. I'll have to see if it kind of the self marker. It's not the pen nib. It's kind of would be more of this kind. Like, yeah, more of this kind pen nib. I think I have a gray one of those, but I have this one, the Gundam marker, GM21 200. I forget if that's a yen price or not. 250, probably, yeah. I think that's the yen price, the number here. But this is it's a kind of designation, Gundam marker GM21. Do these have that extra marker? Yeah, they do. 600. So yeah, yen. XGM 100. So yeah, that's what that is. No, Lala. Nicola lost her tail. There you go, Nicola. So yeah, I mean, there's this marker type. I have a black one as well, GM20 and 21. Did they make the pore type marker in gray? Actually, now I need to see. Marker pore type. Gray, okay, 302, 301. Okay, so apparently they do. Sorry. So apparently they do have it in gray. Apparently, may have to look into that one for myself. What's this set? Yeah, now it's gonna actually show up on my stuff. But these. Okay, these are both the pore types, black and gray, and then the white, or the clear. This is actual thinner. I have that one actually as well. The GM300, looks like it is, yeah. Yeah, that one I've got. It's pretty much thinner for the Gundam markers. What's this one? Is that just an eraser? Yeah, knock type eraser. So, yeah, apparently you can use an eraser. I haven't actually tried that one myself, but that's kind of one of the other options. Alright. That's a bit of the stretch the neck in the other direction. So what made today a little extra tiring was I actually hit my 10,000 steps today, because took the sportling to the zoo, and even though we were only there about 2.5 hours, yeah, just about 2.5 hours, we again walked quite a bit, hit my 10,000 steps. So that's where I am as far as that right now. All right, some more water. So yeah, now those are kind of, yeah, with my recommendations. And we'll see. Prime Day is coming up next Wednesday. What is it, the 8th? Yeah, starting next Wednesday, Prime Days. Let's see if they try to get me with, hey, you want Gundam markers? We got the stuff. That's one way to get rid of some of the excess. Yeah. Start you. Go. Yeah, you're recording, so go side here this time. Motorcycle like that through a residential neighborhood. You do that. require a bit of a cleaning. I think what I will do is, again, after this, I will kind of let it dry out a bit. That, and then facing up or facing down, I forget about that, but all right. Yes, I still need to get you. Alright, so port type. The white parts of this, well, not the port type, is this is more alright, let's risk it. See what'll happen. Okay. Alright, so that was that. Now, I should remember how that was oriented. Well, I know you go there. You go here now. There it goes. Alright. So I'm going to put you oriented this direction and this direction. I'm not going to press too much on a piece where it can be kind of brittle. Just kind of, we'll say, is that dirty how it is? Alright. So that's pretty much most of the paneling. Yeah. Well, you tell me, how's the music coming through? Is it kind of too loud, just kind of background? I can't actually hear how it's coming through, so I need feedback. Is it overpowering my kind of speaking? So, started in on. Okay, alright, let's do it that way. Okay, good. I was worried that it would be too much kind of filling, like drowning me out. I know I did turn it down a bit. It's down to about 40%. And we'll see if I set the OBS recordings settings correctly so that the version of the video that gets saved to Twitch for the weeks, well, for the next 2 weeks, doesn't have the music in the background, and if my my save doesn't have the music to the background, the one that I usually upload to YouTube as well. So we'll see how that pans out. So, alright, also found out that these markers aren't all that great. These are kind of the felt tip kind of markers. I'm not entirely sure what they're for, because I might have to watch some videos about how that's used, but I haven't found found them very useful. And I have a black one and a gray one. I have an extra 4-type black one, which is the kind that I have been enjoying using. It's been pretty good. Yeah, I just used it right now on the red parts of this one right now. We'll continue working on that right now as well. Yeah, that's the idea. That's right. Time for stretching. Yeah, this is just the I finally signed up for Spotify because it's one way to get the music being able to kind of play on this, and at least the program that I'm using uses Spotify. You can also use YouTube. So that's why I kind of went with this version of it also. Get that, being able to have music, at least for the stream. One that has too much of that. There it goes. Well, kind of good enough. Alright, you missed, I don't know when you came in, but I was using the port type or the Tamiya panel line. I am a little afraid to use it because I've seen it happen and I've heard it cracks the plastic sometimes. One of the ways that it's been described is if it's kind of a piece that's kind of pressed together. So I took the shield apart as I did it so I can try to get that done. It seems to be holding up pretty well. So yeah, that's the plan. I'm waiting to see what it'll do to these parts of it. I don't think there's too much pressure on these weight parts on this one, so maybe okay to get away with that. We'll see. Yeah. All right. Let's get back to it. Alright, so recording again. Alright, let's go back to that one. Alright. Okay. Goes. at least do this part inside. Yeah. You may forget to charge my headphones over the week, so now I'm gonna have to kind of change my headphones in a bit too. Hopefully they last through. Alright. So I think with this one, next week I'll try to do the metallic panel line on this one, see if I can get it to do it. I think last time I was able to use the Mr. Thinner to thin out the chrome on this, and then use, I think I use this one, use a little brush to kind of paint it on. Might be able to get away with that. Do that. There it goes. Alright. So, yeah. So, what do I want to do? Let's start on the head. Alright. So, definitely nose. Cheekbones. I think that part is okay, that is one. That was an actual panel line, but now, or like not a panel line, but an actual separation point. Not that one, separation point. That's it for the head, it looks like. Take the head off. I had taken it off a little early before. No, alright. Well, let's do you. I mean, yes, I should be. I want to be using the gray, but oh well, that's what I'll have to do. Yeah. Problem is, yeah, that one's an actual gap. This one is panel line. That's another actual get, but this is supposed to be one. That. Close. Okay, it's good that, well, my headphones went out, but I have the music playing a little too low, so I don't actually hear right now. I'm waiting for my timer to run out so I can grab my other headphones right now. Alright. That one. Yeah, let's work on the arm part. Although I don't actually have to do that because I can just do this. Just in time. Gotta pause that. So as I was saying, looking at this guy, so there's a little bit there, one there. Maybe this part here, although one part of it is actual part of the panel line. Again, a lot of these. Did that actually break? Yeah, it looks like that actually did break. That's why these aren't actually sticking when I try to open this. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, these bits. So yeah, pretty much just this bit here, this bit on this one. And again, might have to use the chrome panel lining if I want to do that. Maybe on the inside of the hand too. But, that's right. I need to go ahead and grab my other headphones. Let's see if they actually can see if they're charged too. It's saying it's only medium battery, and this is always kind of weird because seems like this one's dead too. So, well, I'll have to make sure to charge my headphones tonight. So tomorrow, well, depends. You and I, depending on what we do. Or are you still on? Yeah. So, well, I'm gonna be heading to a place, but Amy wants me home early-ish, so we can help with kind of putting the kids to bed. So, probably won't be, probably be heading home at 6 after we meet. So, I'll do lunch with you, but maybe not dinner. But yeah, all right. So, what do I want to do here? Do I want to start in? The cleaning or not? Going, there it goes. Has to be pushed in a little harder. Yep. All right. Yeah. Even these are low battery, uncharged. Anything else to use? Could use my actual headphones. Alright. The music doesn't get interrupted for you guys, but for me it does. It's kind of weird. Anyway, alright, well, drink first. Drink. Let's go into some cleaning. Prepare for the cleaning. Yeah, we'll do the Mr. Color thinner still. Alright, get back into it. Huff and thinner. Rub the excess out of it. Use it to clean myself too and rub some off. Get some off of it. Alright. Well, I forgot to redo this part, or do this part at least. Get your love. Get your love. Alright, I'm overdoing it there, but alright. Alright, so yes, I still need to do. That's not good. That won't mess too much up in there. To see how I can get that out there. Let's get you done. Alright, now you. That one. Challenge before the whole human race. I never lose. Alright. Wipe this off now. Alright, so those two. Where are we at? Oh wow. 15 minutes. Let's do the other shoulder pad and the two hand parts. Time, yeah. So two arm parts with these little bits here on front and back. Just get that done. And this. Yeah. Alright. So, I mean, that's a little less than half, but we'll see. If tomorrow, if I get back in time, I will, again, try to do the chrome kind of trick, at least for the gun and maybe some of this part, some of the kind of a shield holder kind of piece, the shield attachment kind of piece. See if I can get that to do it again. Wrong way. Right side's up. Alright. So that's kind of where we may finish up tonight. So panel liner didn't turn out too bad, but again, I was kind of afraid to use it on these other parts. So again, this is going to be a little tough because it doesn't look like there's much on the leg armor. No, the bottom of the foot will probably have some panel lining done on there. But yeah, the legs, there's a bit right here. Not really. A little bit right here on the hip shield there. That opens up, doesn't it? Do backpack. The outside of the backpack doesn't really. Okay, so yeah, the chest does kind of. So the chest definitely has some here, has some on this part, and I said I kind of done these little bits here, so I'll probably do that. I'll have to definitely take off that part, but as for the rest of this, again, the legs don't seem to have too much panel lining, except these two. Again, a lot of it more on the back. I don't know if I really want to do that. So, you know, just on the fronts here, kind of in that little gap there. And these parts that open up, should not have come off like that. I mean, so those little bits do. I might do that. Might just kind of do those little bits in there, front and back. Front and the back. Just kind of have them done. And then again, the chest, and then the bottoms of the feet. So, you off, you off. Poly caps. That'll do. So, and most of this doesn't look like it'll be. Alright, actually, you come off. Yeah, you do. Alright. And 4 pieces, well, 2 each are the same thing. So, just gonna be. That. I forget, does this actually open up or not? I think it opens up. I don't remember. It looks like it does. Oh, it does. Okay. Yes, I think the gun attaches to here. Yeah, the gun attaches here. The beam saber attaches to that part. Okay, so there's a little bit here. Don't want to bother doing that. Yeah, probably not. So yeah, that part, that's right. That part opens up to attach the beam saber using this little bit here. This one's to attach the hand, kind of stay connected. Oh, I forgot to wipe this thing. All right, so we'll do that. These, this one, and then for tomorrow, got the feet. Got the feet and the chest. Got what I've got done over here. Beam sabers, core fighters, one shoulder. We'll probably have the second shoulder done today. And then these are what needs to be done for tomorrow. Definitely be doing that one tomorrow. And give this a wipe down. Alright, so that sounds like the plan. Let's get the last little bit done here. A little bit of. I want to do that. That. So yeah, looks like, so we've got that, and we've got this left to do, and then decals for tomorrow. I'll have to look at the instruction booklets right now to see. This instruction manual has decals for, like, instructions on where the decals are supposed to go. Yeah, no. Comes with the instruction manual and the construction manual. So, instruction manual, I didn't see anything. But, alright, so what we have for tomorrow is the chest. Definitely on this top part here. I don't know if I'll do this head part. Definitely this part, kind of. It's got little bits here. Yeah, probably not that. Definitely this little gap here. Oh gosh. And here's one of those again that backpack. Like, there's a lot of detail in there, but do I want to? Don't want to get into the panel lining of all that. It's a lot, or do I just want to be lazy and just not do that? So that's a maybe. I'll decide if I want to do that or not. Alright, so yeah, chest, we'll do the little bits that open here, maybe the inside. I don't know if I really want to do the inside of these or not. Feels like it might be one of those cool things to try to get some kind of the chrome into those little bits. It looks like they would be little hoses. It might be cool to try to do the chrome on those. Again, this one, these could do panel lining, but I'm not sure. And bottoms of the feet could definitely have some. So we'll be doing those parts. Here's another one where I'm wondering if I'm just doing the bottoms of the feet, can I take it off? Come off. I might have to take it apart and see if I just take off those bottom parts and then do the black panel liner, the Tamiya panel liner. Just do that instead for the bottoms of the feet, because yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll have to see. That one started coming off. Or just, yeah, probably just do the black panel liner, the pen that I've been using so far. Do that part, and then yeah, we'll see about the gold or the chrome. Anyway, so that's pretty much it for today. Yeah, so what I did get done is the head, although didn't really have much. Again, not much panel lining. The arms, not much there. ran out of disk space. Huh. Well, guess I'll have to download the recording from Twitch. Anyway, so I got the shoulders in. I'll have to kind of clear that space too. The beam sabers, the core fighter, and the shield. So, not bad progress, not great progress. So yeah, that should be. Yeah, I will kind of call it here today, and then we'll see if I actually do stream tomorrow, depending if I get back in time. I mean, the wife wants me back home at a reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable time, so that may actually happen, and then I will, definitely stream if I do, and I will get that part done. I'll keep you up here for now. Alright. I'll keep you up here for, well, not you, not there. I'll need to figure out a place for this tomorrow. For at least for right now, we'll put you there. So Lloyd, thanks for having been on. Thanks for letting me know how the music was coming through. I will kind of pick up on that tomorrow again if I get back in time. That's the plan. So we'll just kind of take it from there. Thanks for being here, and I will see you guys tomorrow, maybe.